My name is Zoey Calder. I'm the woman they once called weak. The kind who brought protein bars on a hike and packed hand sanitizer for a bonfire. The kind they said wouldn't last a week without Wi-Fi. The kind they laughed at until the laughter ran out. I wasn't built like them. I didn't have broad shoulders or the loudest voice in the room. I wasn't the one slamming beers on the tailgate or leading hiking trips with an axe slung on my back. But I paid attention. I always paid attention. And what I saw terrified me. That we'd built a life stacked on convenience like a house of playing cards one storm away from collapse. They mocked me for thinking that way. But the jokes stopped when the first blackout hit, and no one knew how to flush a toilet without electricity. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this part. So, before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you really like what I have to say here. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It started 2 years before the collapse. I was working in logistics, a job that felt like playing chess in traffic, predicting the unpredictable rerouting supplies before a delay became a disaster. That job didn't make me loud, but it made me sharp. I remember the turning point like it was yesterday. It was my best friend's birthday. She was always more popular than me, more magnetic. The kind who threw parties that looked like Pinterest boards. I showed up late wearing a rain jacket. Everyone else was in crop tops. When I sat down, someone laughed and said, "Zoey probably has a survival kit in her purse." They weren't wrong. I did. Multi-tool iodine tabs, a whistle, even a collapsible cup. And I felt shame, deep, hot shame for being prepared. For being weird. I didn't say anything that night. But when I got home, I ordered a solar oven. That was the first purchase. Then came the water drums, the manuals, the YouTube videos on gray water systems. A crash course in what I now call soft apocalypse prep. I didn't talk about it. I just did it. 6 months later, I bought land. An ugly, scrubby patch in the mountains 3 hours from the city. No running water, no neighbors, no cell signal. When I told my coworkers, they laughed. "Zoe's going rural. She'll last a month before she's crying for DoorDash." One guy even placed bets. 30 days. Max. I made it 132. Then came back to the city not because I needed to, but because I'd proven something to myself. I could survive. Alone. The city when I returned felt louder, dirtier, thinner somehow. Like it was stretched tight over something fragile. And then the world began to fray. It didn't look dramatic at first. A fuel shortage here. A supply chain breakdown there. Food prices crept up, gas lines got longer. People posted about it like it was just another quirky part of modern life. But I knew the difference between a glitch and a trend. This wasn't a glitch. It was an unraveling. I doubled down, reinforced my cabin, stocked seeds, tools, solar panels. I practiced bartering with a local farmer for dried herbs and eggs. I built traps, not just for animals, for people too. Call it paranoid. I called it sober. The day it all broke was sunny. Funny, isn't it? You expect the end to come with sirens or thunder. But no, it was a Tuesday. Clear sky. Grid failed first. No power, no ATMs, no gas pumps, no deliveries. They thought it would come back. It didn't. By day 3, grocery stores looked like a toddler's art project. Shelves emptied, scattered broken jars and cereal boxes crushed on linoleum floors. By day 7, people started fighting in parking lots. By day 10, the city stank of desperation, sour metallic like sweat, and burnt plastic and spoiled food. That's when I left. Back to my land, my rules, my quiet. I don't know what I expected. I guess I thought I'd be alone. Just me and the squirrels again. I was wrong. Day 14, just as I was grinding acorns into flour, I heard it. A knock. Tentative, then more urgent. I didn't answer. I peeked through the peephole. It was Rachel, from the birthday party. Eyes red, jacket too thin, lips cracked. I opened the door an inch. She exhaled a breath like it cost her. "Zoey." Her voice cracked. "Please. It's bad. I didn't know where else to go." Behind her were 3 others. Familiar faces. All of them had once called me soft. Now they looked like crumpled paper dolls. I didn't say yes. I just stepped back. And that's how it started. That's how they came to depend on me. But don't confuse mercy with forgiveness. I had rules. And rule 1. You eat what you grow, or you don't eat. They didn't laugh anymore. They didn't know how to garden. I mean really garden. Not basil in a jar on a windowsill kind of gardening. I'm talking compost piles, perlite ratios, crop rotation, seed soaking, knowing which plants draw aphids and which repel them. They looked at the dirt like it owed them something. And when the first frost rolled in, they realized nature doesn't take pity on influencers. The first week, Rachel cried while trying to hoe a straight line. My hands hurt, she said. I just looked at her. So do mine. She didn't ask for sympathy again. There were 4 of them that first month. Rachel, Jared, the betting guy Monica, who once said she couldn't sleep without white noise, and Chris, a CrossFitter with the emotional intelligence of a toaster. They came to me because I had solar water warmth and food. But they stayed because… Actually, no! They didn't stay because of anything. They clung. They didn't know how to trap squirrels, or skin fish, or filter stream water with charcoal and gravel. But they learned. Oh, they learned fast. The second night, Jared tried to microwave a protein bar by holding it under a candle. The wax dripped on his hand and blistered his thumb. He screamed. I handed him aloe from the back of the pantry. Didn't say a word. It was Monica who finally asked what no one else had the guts to. What happens if you say no? I shrugged. You leave. And that was the first real silence, the kind that wraps around a group, like a fog, thick and wide. That silence taught them more than any of my rules. I set chores. One person chopped wood, another filtered water, one handled cooking, one gathered kindling. I took first watch every night. I didn't trust them. Not yet. And slowly their egos peeled off like sunburn. Jared stopped flexing every time he picked up a log. Chris started asking questions instead of assuming answers. Monica braided pine needles into rope like she was born for it. And Rachel, she stopped crying. She started paying attention. I'd find her scribbling notes in an old journal I'd given her. Measurements. How much water it took to boil beans. The difference between bear scat and deer scat. She was scared, sure, but she was changing. It was on day 30 that everything flipped. A man came to the clearing. He wasn't one of us. He was older. Scarred face, army green coat, rifle on his back. Said his name was Don. Said he'd been hiking west and smelled our smoke. Asked if we had food to trade. Chris started to say yes. I put my hand up. No trades, I said. No visitors. Keep moving. Don looked at me, then at the others. Someone's in charge here, he muttered. Guess I see who. He left. But not before he added, be careful with that kind of power. After he was gone, the others looked at me like I had just turned into something new. I wasn't trying to be alpha. I was trying to keep us alive. There were no second chances out here. One bad trade, one wrong person, and we were toast. Or worse, on someone else's menu. That night, nobody argued about watch rotations. We started planting carrots inside old trash bins, safer from pests. I showed them how to grow potatoes from eyes. Taught them to eat dandelion greens and to distinguish pine from yew. And they began to get it. By day 40, they'd built a shower rig from a salvaged barrel. By day 50, they stopped asking when we'd go back. Because by then they knew there was no back, only forward. And I was the only one who knew the trail. Of course not. Everything was peaceful. Jared started hoarding dry snacks under his cot. I found the wrappers. Didn't yell. I just added an extra shift of latrine duty. Chris tried to cheat the water logs. Pretended he filtered more than he did. I made him drink from the stream. He didn't fake again. It wasn't cruel. It was consequence. I wasn't their mom. I was the difference between them seeing the next full moon or not. And I wasn't going to let their old world arrogance ruin this second chance. The days got shorter, wood got harder to chop, and the hunger got louder. But we didn't bend. We adapted. One morning, Rachel brought me a cup of pine needle tea and just said, "Thank you." I didn't know what for, but I nodded. I think she meant for everything. The joke now was that I ran the Calder commune. Funny, considering they used to call me soft. Now they asked how much longer the meat would last. How deep to plant beets. How to make candles from fat. They no longer questioned my voice. They just listened. I'd become what they needed. And what they feared a little too. That's the funny thing about survival. The people you called weak, they're the ones who keep you alive. There's something strange that happens when people realize they can't leave you. They start watching you more closely. Not with admiration, with calculation. By day 60, I felt it something shifting in the air. The desperation had cooled. The fear wasn't as sharp. Now came something else. Resentment, maybe. Or memory. They remembered who I was before the world ended. And that was a problem. See, people will worship you when they're starving. But the moment their stomachs fill, they start wanting power back. It was Monica who cracked first. She pulled me aside one morning, quiet as smoke. Hey, I was just thinking she started all sugary sweet. Maybe we could do a vote on some stuff. I looked at her. Like what? I don't know. Watch schedules, food rations? Just, like democratic stuff? I let the silence stretch long enough for the birds to finish a chorus. Then I said no. She blinked. Why not? I pointed to the compost pile. Because I was the one who figured out how to not poison us. It wasn't about ego. It was about survival. She walked off in a huff, mumbling. Later that night, her firewood pile came up short. Coincidence? Maybe. But I watched more closely after that. Chris was next. He started bragging again low-key. I did recon in the Marines, he told Jared one night, loud enough for me to hear. Funny. That wasn't in the tearful story he'd told me the night he arrived about missing his mom and eating uncooked rice for 3 days. Then I noticed he'd rigged a second stash beef jerky in a waterproof sock under a loose plank in the sleeping loft. I took it. Didn't say a word. The next morning it was gone. He never brought it up, but he looked at me differently after that. It wasn't hate. It was fear. Good. I didn't need love out here. I needed order. We weren't roommates. We weren't a team. We were a system. And I was the one who built it. The only one who knew what not to eat, which mushrooms made your kidneys melt, how to make a splint from pine branches. I was the only one who had read the manual. And I was tired of pretending that meant nothing. Still, I wasn't blind. I saw them pairing off. Chris and Monica whispering more. Jared wandering off on longer walks. And Rachel, she stayed close to me. She cooked when I didn't ask. She reinforced the garden fence without being told. She learned. One night while I was on watch, she brought me a blanket. Didn't say anything. Just draped it over my shoulders and sat next to me. We watched the trees sway in the moonlight. I used to think strong meant loud, she said. I didn't reply. She added, but you never raise your voice. And everyone still listens. She was right. Because I didn't need to scream. I had consequence. Then came the incident. Jared disappeared for a full day. When he came back, he was sweaty eyes wild, holding a plastic bag like it was treasure. I found it. He grinned. A stash. Someone's old hunting shed, maybe. Cans. Blankets. A flare gun. I looked at the bag. Half the cans were swollen. Dangerous. And that flare gun, that was a beacon. An invitation for every desperate person still breathing to come find us. I took it from him, snapped it in half, dropped it into the fire. He exploded. Are you insane? That could have saved us. No, I said. That could have killed us. We fought, not fists words. Harsh ones. You're not a queen, Zoey, he shouted. You're just a scared little control freak who lucked into some land. I stood there quiet, let him yell, watched the others gather, Monica nodding along, Chris folding his arms. Only Rachel stayed on my side. It wasn't a coup, not yet, but it was a warning shot. Later that night, I sat with my axe across my knees and thought about what came next. Power's funny. You think you want it until you have to defend it. I didn't sleep. Didn't need to. I already knew the answer. The next morning, I changed the rules. Everyone had to hunt once a week. Alone. No exceptions. It wasn't about meat. It was about reminding them what the world really was. Hard. Cold. Final. You don't vote on survival. You earn it. They grumbled. But they went. Chris came back empty-handed. Monica cried after seeing a squirrel. Rachel brought back a rabbit. Jared didn't return at all. Sunset passed. Then midnight. When he stumbled in at dawn, his hands were bleeding and his eyes were glassy. Got lost, he mumbled. Fell in a creek. Froze all night. I handed him a dry blanket and a single slice of jerky. He never challenged me again. Funny what clarity hypothermia brings. That week, no one asked about votes. No one stashed snacks. No one whispered when I left the room. Because now they knew. Out here, you don't challenge the fire that's keeping you warm. You feed it. Winter doesn't knock. It barges in. And when it arrived, I saw who was built for it and who wasn't. The first snow fell on day 92. It came fast, wet, and heavy, swallowing our clearing in white silence. The solar panels gave less. The chickens slowed their laying. The cold pressed into the wood, into the walls, into our bones. I had planned for this. Insulated the cabin walls with wool batting. Dug a root cellar. Stocked dried lentils, rice-powdered egg. I even had salt blocks and a jar of multivitamins. But no amount of planning softens that moment when you wake up and your breath clouds in front of your face. Rachel adapted the best. She was smart about layers-rotated fire duty without being told and started sleeping near the stove like a feral cat with good instincts. Chris grew quieter. Monica got meaner. Jared barely spoke. By mid-December, the ice on the creek was thick enough to hold our weight, but not our trust. Monica slipped once, cursed the world, the weather, and finally me. "You like this?" she snapped one morning, tossing a broken bucket at the cabin wall. "This whole Queen of the Ashes thing, it makes you feel powerful." I didn't answer right away. I was stirring stew made from lentils, wild onion, and a bit of squirrel meat. Finally, I said, "I like that we're not dead." That shut her up, but it didn't erase the bitterness in her eyes. See, people confuse dependence with devotion. They think just because they need you, they owe you nothing. So I stopped expecting thanks and started expecting compliance. One night, I gathered them around the fire and laid it all out. "We're entering resource lock," I said. "That means no unnecessary trips, no waste, no drama. You get 1 cup of hot food a day minimum. More if you work." Monica scoffed. "I've been working." "No," I said. "You've been complaining loudly while standing near work." Rachel smirked into her tea. Chris didn't even lift his eyes. Jared. He was different now. Subdued. Almost small. Winter had made him humble. Or maybe it had made him aware. He came to me after dinner and asked if I could show him how to build a snare trap properly. I nodded. We didn't speak much while we worked, but he watched my hands like they held answers. They did. He placed the trap the next morning, caught a rabbit that afternoon. When he brought it in, he didn't boast. Just handed it to me and said, "You can gut it better than me." I handed him a blade. "Learn." He did. That's how survival works. It humbles you. Or it ends you. By day 110, the dynamics had shifted. I wasn't just the center, I was the spine. Without me, nothing held. And they knew it. So when the first outsider showed up in weeks, everything tilted again. Her name was Petra. She came through the trees with a white flag tied to her walking stick. Rachel spotted her first and called out. I stepped outside with my axe. Petra was wiry, wrapped in scarves and patched clothes. Looked like she'd walked from another century. "I'm not here to steal," she said, "just hoping for a trade. My people need antibiotics." She pulled out a pouch and emptied it. Copper wire sewing needles, jerky, 2 bottles of iodine. Good stuff. Real barter material. The others looked to me. I stepped forward and asked, "How many are with you?" "6," she said. "One's got a wound. Might go septic." I took a slow breath. We had antibiotics. Not a lot. And giving some away might have meant someone here wouldn't make it to spring. But I looked at Petra's eyes. She wasn't bluffing. I made the trade. Monica exploded. "You're insane. That could be us next week." "It could be them tonight," I said. "And it's not your call." She slammed a door. Didn't come out for 2 days. When she did, she worked twice as hard. Because even anger bends to structure. Petra returned a week later with a rabbit and a hand-knit scarf. I didn't need either, but I accepted both. Because goodwill is like firewood. You stack it while it's dry so you have it when it's not. That winter tested everything. Our systems, our patience, our bones. Chris broke a finger splitting wood. Rachel got frostbite on her cheek. I lost weight. We all did, but we didn't fall apart. Because every rule I made, every cold truth, I spoke it all, kept us tethered. By day 120, we had a rhythm. I cooked less, taught more. Rachel taught Monica how to braid cord from sinew. Jared started building rabbit hutches for spring. And at night, when we sat around the fire, no one asked what if. They just listened and sharpened knives. One night, Rachel looked at me as we tucked in near the stove and said, "You didn't save us." I raised an eyebrow. "No," she smiled. "You made it, so we had to save ourselves." I nodded. Same thing, really. Because that was always the plan. Not to carry them. To make sure they could carry themselves. It was day 131 when the snow started melting, but nothing about it felt like a thaw. Melt water trickled through the trees, and the sun peeked out like it was apologizing for the last 3 months. But I wasn't fooled. Neither were the deer or the hawks or the people who now woke up in my cabin each morning, wondering who they were without frostbite and hunger. Spring doesn't bring peace. It brings memory. And memory is a dangerous thing when people forget what it costs to stay alive. Monica started brushing her hair again. Chris carved a chess set from firewood. Rachel began drawing tiny, careful pictures in the margins of our old seed catalog. Jared spent most of his time reinforcing the hutch. He worked like someone paying off debt. Me, I watched, because something always breaks when comfort returns. And this time it was our sense of unity. The first argument was over water. Our barrels were still half frozen. The creek was running high fast and full of silt. I'd set up a sand and charcoal filtration system, but it wasn't fast enough for everyone's sudden thirst. Chris dumped an unfiltered jug into the kettle while I was out cutting branches. When I got back, Rachel looked pale. "I stopped him," she whispered. But he got loud. I confronted him, not with anger, with silence. He buckled fast. "I didn't think it mattered anymore," he said. "We made it." I stepped closer. "We haven't made it. We've barely survived the first act." He tried to laugh it off, but no one laughed with him. Because even now they knew. I wasn't afraid to exile someone. And we all knew Chris wouldn't last 72 hours on his own. He didn't test me again. But the damage was done. The group had begun to drift. There were glances now. Rachel looking at Jared, Monica whispering again. I heard the phrase "we could" more than once. That's when I decided to move the line. We needed a reset, a reminder. So I staged a test. I announced that the food stores were running low. That unless we pulled in a major source of protein within 72 hours, we'd be cutting meals in half. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't quite true either. I had enough to stretch us. Barely. But they didn't need comfort. They needed clarity. And fear, as always, was clarity's best friend. Jared offered to scout. Rachel volunteered to trap. Monica hesitated but joined. Chris stayed behind to reinforce the shed. I watched them disappear into the woods like little soldiers, each holding onto the silence like it might tear. That night, I sat by the fire alone for the first time in months. And I thought about the woman I used to be. The one who couldn't kill a spider. The one who apologized when someone interrupted her. The one who flinched when she heard the phrase "too emotional." That version of me was gone. She hadn't survived the snow. And I didn't miss her. In her place stood something colder, sharper. A woman who knew that being needed was more powerful than being loved. The next day, Jared returned with nothing. Rachel had caught 2 squirrels and a quail. Monica came back empty-handed but tried to lie about it. "I saw a deer, but it ran," she said. "I followed it for miles." I tilted my head. "You left footprints." They circled within 200 yards. She turned red, slammed down her bow. "This is sick," she snapped. "You're playing God." "No," I said. "I'm playing shepherd. And you're just mad. There's a fence." She stormed off. That night, I handed Rachel the largest bowl of stew. She blinked. "But Jared, he failed." "You didn't." Chris raised his spoon to toast her. Jared stayed quiet. Monica didn't come to dinner. But the next morning, she was the first to stoke the fire. Lesson learned. From that point on, everything shifted again. Not into unity. Into function. We stopped pretending to be a community. We became a machine. Each part had a job. Each movement mattered. There was no room for pity or nostalgia. Spring had thawed the land, but it had frozen something else. The illusion that we were equal. We weren't. I knew more. I had prepared more. I made the decisions. They executed them. And slowly they stopped fighting that truth. Not because they loved it, because they needed it. I became something they couldn't name out loud. A mix of Mother General and Oracle. Zoey of the woods. The weak girl who wouldn't die. They stopped questioning my rules and started enforcing them for me. Rachel began managing the garden without being told. Chris organized tools. Jared started tracking inventory. Monica handled water perfectly now. They policed each other with quiet glances. No more whispers. No more schemes. Just quiet, efficient survival. And I realized something then. This was never about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving me right. That I wasn't weak. I was prepared. And now, they couldn't survive without me. It's funny how dependence feels different once it settles in. At first, it's like a favor, then a pattern. Eventually, it becomes law. By day 150, they didn't just need me, they functioned through me. And I felt it. Not pride, not victory. Power. Not the loud flashing kind. The quiet kind. The kind you only notice when it's taken away. But I hadn't lost it. If anything, I had more control than ever, and none of them even realized how complete it was. Monica stopped calling me names even under her breath. Chris kept a respectful 2 steps behind. Jared asked permission before shifting chore assignments. Rachel started finishing my sentences, and when she made decisions, she mirrored my tone. Calm, decisive, unapologetic. But something about her was changing too. She smiled less, laughed even less than that. And late at night, I saw her staring into the fire eyes, unfocused like she was somewhere else. Or maybe becoming someone else. That's how it works, I guess. Survival doesn't just change your priorities. It rewrites your morality. And we'd all been rewritten. It was around this time that we had our first uninvited guest since Petra. Only this one didn't carry a white flag. It was dusk. The trees were breathing mist again, and I was just returning from a solo perimeter check when I saw it. A man in our clearing, one hand held high, the other gripping a crude hunting bow. He didn't say anything at first. Just looked around, saw the greenhouse frame, the chicken run, the smoke curling from the chimney, and then he said, "This yours?" I didn't answer. Rachel stepped up beside me. "I asked you a question," he said louder. Now Chris, Jared, and Monica had emerged 2 half-circle behind me. I said, "You're outnumbered." He grinned, "Not looking for trouble." "Then leave." He looked at the bow in his hand like it hadn't been his idea to carry it, then turned to go. But before he stepped into the trees, he added, "You're not the only ones who figured it out. More of us coming through. Just a matter of time." He vanished into the dusk. And for the first time in months, I felt the sting of uncertainty. Because he was right. People were getting desperate. And if even one of them found our setup attractive enough to take by force, well, let's just say we weren't exactly a militia. I called a meeting that night, made them all sit around the fire like it was a war council. This was always going to happen, I said. We need defenses. Real ones. Jared nodded. Traps. More than traps, I said. We need visibility perimeter warnings, fallback shelters, and a plan for what happens if we're breached. Chris raised a brow. Breached. This isn't a fortress, Zoey. Exactly, I said. It's a target. The next 2 weeks became a blur of motion. We dug pits, hung cans on fishing line as early warning alarms, built a second shelter low to the ground, half-buried, lined with emergency supplies. I taught Rachel how to use the bow. She was a natural. She asked me one morning, "Do you ever think about just leaving it all behind?" I paused. Leaving what? This place. This system. Everything. Just walking. I thought about it longer than I should have. Then I said no. Why not? Because walking means trusting what's out there more than what I've built here. She didn't press, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. It wasn't about the world outside. It was about me. That's when I realized something dangerous. She'd outgrown fear. And without fear, people start asking questions. Testing boundaries. One morning, Monica asked if they could make a few decisions without me. She framed it gently. We just thought maybe a committee. Not all the time, just. I cut her off. No. That night, she cried quietly behind the coop. And I didn't comfort her. Because once you start letting people think you need their consent, they forget you kept them alive. We were back to survival. Only this time, it wasn't just the elements or scarcity. It was ego. Mine. Theirs. all of it scraping against the tight box we'd all built together. We weren't starving anymore. We weren't freezing, but we were restless. And restlessness breeds rebellion. The first crack came on day 172. Chris disappeared. Not long, just a few hours. But long enough, he returned with two strangers. One woman, one teenager. They looked exhausted, gaunt. Chris said, "They need shelter?" "Just a few days." I didn't even hesitate. "No." Rachel looked at me. "We have the space. We don't have the trust." Chris stepped forward. "So what, we become the thing we feared?" Cold, closed, cruel. "No," I said. "We become what we have to." They didn't argue, but they didn't obey either. That night, I caught Monica sneaking food to the newcomers who were camped just outside the fence line. I didn't yell. I took the food back. And the next morning, I told the strangers to leave. They did, quietly. But the damage was permanent. Chris stopped speaking to me. Monica too. Jared was polite but distant. Rachel remained beside me. But she didn't sit next to me at dinner anymore. She sat across, watching, measuring. I was still the leader, but something had shifted. I hadn't just made them depend on me. I had made them remember what it felt like to be powerless. And even loyalty has a breaking point. By day 180, it was spring in name only. Sure, the ground was thawing and the trees had started to blush green again, but the cabin, it was colder than ever. Not the air was warming. I mean us. We no longer shared stories after dinner. No one laughed at Monica's sarcastic remarks anymore because Monica didn't make any. Jared had stopped humming while he worked. And Chris only spoke when spoken to. Rachel still made the tea, still rotated the compost, still walked perimeter with me. But now when I gave her instructions, she nodded with her chin instead of her eyes. We'd become efficient. We'd become something close to perfect. But we'd also become brittle. And brittle things don't bend. They break. It started with the chickens. Or more specifically, it started when one of them disappeared. I'd counted 6 the night before. By morning, there were 5. No feathers, no blood trail. Just gone. At first we assumed a fox. But I'd set the traps. I knew the perimeter. I did another count at dusk. Still 5. The next night I stayed up, waited behind the coop with a small hand axe and a line of salt. At 2, Swata. I saw him, Jared, crouched like a thief, one hand around a hen's neck, the other stuffing a cloth bag. I didn't yell, didn't move, just stood, let the crunch of my boots in the gravel speak for me. He froze. We locked eyes, and for a long time neither of us said a word. Then I whispered, "Why?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, he said, "Because I don't trust you anymore." I nodded slowly. "Then you need to go." He blinked. "Go. You steal from us, you go." His voice cracked. "You are us." "No," I said. "I'm what kept us alive." Rachel stepped out from the shadows then. She'd followed me. And when Jared turned to her for help for something, she just stared at him, emotionless. He left the next morning. No one cried. No one stopped him. But the silence after he was gone, it rang like a bell. After that, the system tightened even more. Chore schedules went from loose to logged. Food stores were locked behind a key, my key. Weapon inventory, cataloged nightly. I could feel it. Their breathing changed around me. Polite, obedient, distant, like they were living near a lion that hadn't eaten yet. And yet things worked. The garden flourished. The traps kept filling. We constructed rain collectors and started curing meat properly. They stopped asking permission. They waited for instruction. There's a fine line between loyalty and fear. And we'd crossed it. Still, I didn't regret it. Because the only alternative was chaos. And I'd seen what chaos did to people. Back when this all started, when the cities burned and families turned on each other over gasoline and crackers, I hadn't forgotten. But I was starting to realize they had, because safety when repeated long enough breeds delusion. And delusion makes people brave in the wrong ways. One evening, I caught Chris and Monica whispering near the edge of the clearing. They went quiet the moment they saw me. Monica forced a smile. "Just talking." I nodded. "About what?" Chris cleared his throat. "Nothing important." I didn't press. But that night, I checked the weapon stash. One knife was missing. The next day, I asked Rachel to watch them. She didn't ask why. That night, the knife reappeared. On the table. Polished. Clean. Monica wouldn't meet my eyes at breakfast. Chris left half his food untouched. I'd never said a word. But I didn't need to. Fear did the speaking for me now. And yet, something about it ached. Because when they first came to me, they were broken, desperate, afraid. And I helped them become strong. But strong people don't stay subjects forever. They become something else, something dangerous. It was Rachel who finally said it out loud. We were planting onions side by side in the late afternoon sun. The dirt was warm, soft. For a moment, it almost felt like the world had healed. Then she said, "You're losing them." I didn't look up. I know. She dug another hole. They're not afraid of the world anymore. They should be. She nodded. But they're more afraid of you. We kept working. After a while, I asked, "What about you?" She didn't answer right away. When she did, it was soft. "I'm afraid for you." That night, I sat alone on the porch listening to the wind move through the trees like something alive. I thought about Jared. I thought about the strangers we turned away. The laughs we used to have. The way Chris once carved spoons just for fun. Gone. I'd built a world where people survived. But maybe I'd forgotten how to let them live. Still, I couldn't go back. Not now. Because every rule I'd written, every punishment I'd delivered, it had worked. And you don't throw out the playbook just because the players start asking questions. You double down. Because the moment you loosen your grip, you lose everything. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Not after coming this far. Not after being right. Not after proving that weak doesn't mean useless. It means underestimated. And underestimated people, they learn how to win without applause. Day 196. Rachel found a footprint. Not ours. It was at the edge of the north path near the old pine stand where we used to stack cut firewood. I hadn't been back there in weeks. It wasn't part of our main supply chain anymore. But she noticed the disturbed moss the mud turned under in a way our boots didn't do. She showed me in silence. I bent down, traced the print with 2 fingers. Too large for any of us. Deep. "Recent," Rachel whispered, "someone's watching." I nodded once. And waiting. That night, I posted double watch. I didn't tell the others about the footprint. Not yet. They didn't need fear. They needed function. If they started spiraling into paranoia, we'd lose the rhythm. And rhythm was everything. Instead, I set the silent alarms. Cans on wire. Mirrors on tree limbs. Chalk marks on trees that only I knew how to read. And then I waited. I didn't sleep that week. Not fully. Because if someone was scouting us, testing us, counting heads, then the next step wasn't conversation. It was invasion. I moved the weapons closer to the center of the cabin. Hid one under my mattress. Another under the front step. Chris noticed. Didn't say a word. But the quiet between us, thicker than the trees. Rachel stood guard with me on the 3rd night. We didn't talk. Just watched the clearing shift in the moonlight. Then she said, "I think you should let them vote." I turned. Slowly. On what? On anything she said. Even something small. So they remember. They have voices. I stared at her. Not angry. Just tired. Voices don't grow crops. Voices don't kill foxes. She sighed. But silence breeds enemies. I didn't answer. Because I knew she wasn't wrong. But I also knew something she didn't. That sometimes giving people a choice was more dangerous than taking one away. Because once they taste freedom again, they forget what got them fed. And then they start dreaming of something they haven't earned. Still, her words echoed. So the next morning, I gave them a choice. Sort of. I presented 2 plans. Plan A. We reinforce the chicken coop and move water barrels closer to the house. Plan B. We divert effort to setting up a watchtower and hunting blind. I let them vote. Rachel smiled. Monica looked suspicious. But they voted unanimous. Plan B. They wanted to feel secure, not just efficient. Fine. I didn't argue. I let them have it. They built the blind, carved from a dead elm tree perched just high enough to get a view of the lower path. Chris volunteered to sleep there one night. That's when it happened. Day 200. A fire. Not ours. Visible from the blind. A flicker in the trees. Too far to be accidental. Too still to be a campfire. Signal fire. Rachel woke me with her hand on my shoulder. North Trail. They're coming. I didn't panic. I just stood, tied my boots, woke the others, gave instructions like I was reciting a grocery list. Chris, on the blind bow ready. Monica, collect water, douse fires, prep to evacuate. Rachel, pack antibiotic seeds maps. I'd already built fallback packs. They didn't know that. Jared's mistake had taught me exile is one thing, losing everything is another, but we didn't flee. We waited. And they came. 3 men, 1 woman, muddy, slow-moving, not soldiers, but not helpless either. They approached just before dawn, walking like they'd rehearsed it. I met them in the clearing. A woman with a gray scarf stepped forward. "We're not here to steal," she said. "We're here to join." Her voice was calm, practiced, too smooth. I looked over her shoulder, saw knives, makeshift clubs. Joining doesn't usually involve weapons. I said, "How many of you?" She hesitated. 5. I shook my head. "You said we're, but only 4 are visible." She blinked, then moved. Fast. She reached for something on her belt, but I already had the flare. Yes, I kept one. After all this time, 1 single flare in a sealed case. I shot it straight up. Bright, loud, red. Startled them enough to freeze. Then Rachel stepped out of the brush behind them. Arrow notched. Drawn. The others stepped out too. Chris with a makeshift spear. Monica with the axe. Even quiet, cautious Monica. The woman with the gray scarf looked around and realized she was surrounded. Not by soldiers, but by survivors? Real ones. She held up her hands. "We just wanted shelter." I nodded. "You wanted control." We were scared. "We all are," I said. "But you brought fear with weapons." She dropped the blade, slowly. And I did something that surprised even me. I let them go, watched them disappear back into the woods quieter than they came. That night around the fire, no one spoke for a while. Then Chris said, "You were right." I raised a brow. "About what?" He looked into the flames. "About everything." No one disagreed. Because they saw it now. Not just the danger outside, but the use of control inside. I hadn't built a dictatorship. I'd built a shield. And for once, they didn't resent it. They respected it. That night, Rachel sat beside me again. Not across. And she said, "If something happened to you, I don't think we'd make it." I shook my head. "Yes, you would. Because of what you taught us." "No," I said. "Because you'd have no choice. And sometimes that's enough." Day 207. We didn't go back to normal after the intruders left. We evolved. It's a funny thing once you've stood toe-to-toe with a threat and held your ground, the way you carry yourself changes. Everyone moved a little tighter, a little more alert, not jumpy, just aware. Like we'd all agreed silently to stop pretending the danger was temporary. Because it wasn't. The world out there hadn't paused. It had shifted. And now the weight of that shift pressed on our clearing like heavy fog. But something else changed too. They started looking at me not like I was a gatekeeper, but like I was the wall. They finally saw what I'd seen from the start. That comfort was an illusion, and that rules weren't oppression. They were scaffolding. Still, I knew it wouldn't last. Nothing does. Not leadership, not loyalty, not even gratitude. It was Monica who broke the silence first. Late one afternoon, as the others gathered kindling and reinforced the chicken wire, she approached me while I was sharpening knives. She didn't speak for a long time, just watched the blade glint in the sun. Then she said, "You're never going to let us lead, are you?" I stopped sharpening, not from guilt, from annoyance. Define lead. Q. She crossed her arms. Make decisions. Share the weight. Be more than just your labor force. I considered that. Because to her, this was a power issue. To me, it was a survival issue. "You want to vote on who stokes the fire?" I asked. "Fine. Vote on chores. Vote on schedules. Hell, vote on tea flavors." She didn't smile. "Don't patronize me." And there it was. Not a rebellion. A challenge. I said nothing. Just handed her the knife I'd been sharpening. She hesitated. "What's this?" I said, "If you think I'm a tyrant, take this. Take the keys. Take the storeroom. Run the perimeter. Reinforce the east side where it's soft. Track inventory. Keep everyone fed and calm. Prepare for fire, flood, betrayal, starvation. Be ready to kill. Be ready to lose. And when you're done with all that, then tell me what leadership feels like. She didn't take the knife, but she didn't walk away either. She just stood there because she finally saw it, not the power. The cost. Chris was the next one to come around. He started checking traps before I reminded him. He started repairing seams in his boots, started packing his own kits, drying his own meat. He even started teaching Rachel how to build snares. Just in case, he said. Case of what? She asked. He didn't answer, because he knew there's always another case, another collapse, another enemy, even if that enemy is time. The oddest change, though, was me. I'd expected to feel triumphant after the outsiders left, after everyone fell back in line, but I didn't. I felt lonely. Not in the usual way. It wasn't the absence of people. It was the absence of opposition. And I realized I didn't crave power. I craved purpose. I was sharp because they needed me to be. But what happens when the blade has no whetstone? When everyone obeys? When nothing surprises you? You start wondering if you built a fortress or a cage. That night, I walked the perimeter alone. Didn't take a weapon. Didn't need to. The trees were calm. The wind steady. The night sounds familiar. And somewhere between the north marker and the old deer trail, I sat down. Not because I was tired, but because I wanted to be still. I watched the stars, listened to the quiet hum of a world without engines. And I asked myself something I hadn't asked in a very long time. What now? I'd won. The old me, the one they mocked, was gone. I'd proven them all wrong. But revenge has a shelf life. Once it's served, what do you eat next? I returned to the cabin just before dawn. Rachel was waiting by the fire. She handed me a mug of pine tea. No words. And then she said, "You don't have to carry it forever." I didn't look at her. If I don't, who will? She shrugged. Someone you trained. Someone who watched. I sipped the tea. Like you. She gave a small smile. Maybe it wasn't a promise, but it was a path. That night, I pulled a notebook from under my bunk. Started writing everything I knew. How to harvest sap. How to rotate soil. How to stitch wounds. How to detect lies. It wasn't a surrender. It was a legacy. Because I'd spent 200 days teaching them how to survive. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to teach them how to lead. Day 212. I woke to the sound of laughter. Not a lot. Just two voices. Rachel and Monica. Quiet, controlled like laughter, still felt like something they needed to ration. But it was real. I didn't interrupt. I just listened from the other side of the cabin wall, letting the sound wrap around me like a blanket I hadn't known I missed. It wasn't just them. Chris had started humming again. Rachel hummed too when she thought no one was listening. Even Monica whistled as she hauled buckets from the stream. The strangest part, nothing external had changed. The danger was still there. The forest still loomed. The world was still broken. But something had shifted in us, or maybe without me. Because for the first time since the collapse, I felt it. They were surviving on their own. Not perfectly, not without guidance, but with a confidence that didn't come from my instruction. It came from practice. That morning, I didn't issue orders. I just watched, and the system ran anyway. Firewood chopped, water filtered, perimeter checked. I'd designed the machine, but now the machine worked without me. And that was terrifying. Because if they didn't need me, what was I? Who was I without their dependence? I spent the afternoon alone in the garden pulling weeds that didn't really need pulling. The soil was soft, cooperative, the kind of dirt that cradles seeds and forgives mistakes. Rachel found me there, hands muddy, sleeves rolled up to my elbows. "You okay?" she asked. I shrugged. Just thinking. She crouched beside me, ran a hand through the soil. "You ever think about what happens after this?" she said. I gave her a look. After what? All of this. When the world comes back. I laughed once. A dry bark. "It's not coming back." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You sure?" "Yes." And I was. Because the world we had before, it was a bubble. Convenience masquerading as civilization. A house of cards that collapsed at the first strong wind. This dirt under our nails, this firewood, this barter, this caution. This was real. But I knew what she really meant. She meant what happens if we go back to cities. Back to jobs and noise and phones. What happens to me? And the answer was simple. I vanish. Not physically, but the version of me that exists here, the one they once called weak, and now obey without question. She only lives in survival, in crisis, in need. And as they healed, she became obsolete. Still, I didn't say that. Instead, I asked, would you go back? Rachel didn't hesitate. No. Why not? She smiled faintly. Because I like who I am here. I didn't know what to say to that. So I nodded and went back to pulling weeds. But later, as the sun dipped below the tree line, I thought about what she said. About identity. About who I had become. The next day, I gathered everyone by the fire, just like I had the night we turned away the intruders. But this time, there was no threat, only a decision. I'm stepping back, I said. Monica blinked. What? You're ready, I told them. To lead. To plan. To choose? Chris frowned. What if you're wrong? I'm not. Rachel said nothing, just watched me with eyes that held both pride and worry. I'll still be here, I said. But I won't interfere unless I have to. No one cheered. No one clapped. But something eased in the space between us. Like tension exhaling. They didn't celebrate. They just accepted, and the next day, they ran the place without me. They assigned tasks, adjusted the food schedule, even started mapping expansion for the West Garden. And I walked, not away, just outside the perimeter, through trees I hadn't wandered in months, past the ridge, down to the stream, where the world was quiet again. I sat by the water, closed my eyes, and let the hum of insects and the burble of the creek lull the leader in me to sleep. Because I wasn't needed there. Not now. Maybe not ever again. And that was peace. Or at least the closest I'd come. Not because I lost control, but because I let it go before they tried to take it. I'd done what I set out to do. They called me weak. But in the end, they depended on me to survive. And now they could live without me. Which means I'd won, completely. Day 217. They held a meeting without me. Not in secret, Rachel told me in passing that morning casually, like she was mentioning a change in the weather. We're going to sit down after dinner. Talk garden strategy. I nodded. Want me to call you over when it starts? No need. And I meant it. Because I could feel it how things had shifted for good. They weren't asking anymore. They were deciding, and this time I wasn't the center of the map. After dinner, I stepped outside while the rest of them circled around the fire. I heard snatches of conversation, Rachel talking about expanding the west bed, Monica suggesting beets instead of carrots, Chris pushing back gently about soil pH. It was almost laughable. These were the same people who once couldn't boil water without asking me how long. Now they were trading notes on compost ratios. I leaned against a tree and watched the firelight flicker through the slats of the cabin wall. They didn't ask for my input. They didn't need it. And somehow, I wasn't angry. I was relieved. But relief is complicated. Because once the pressure lets up, something else floods in. The question of what now? For 200 days, every breath I took was tied to their survival. Every step, every plan, every calculated risk, it was all wrapped around them needing me. Now with that weight lifting, I could feel the ground under me shift. Not in a bad way. Just unfamiliar. Like standing up after a long ride and realizing you forgot how to walk straight. I spent the next morning cataloging what was left of our winter stockpile. Salt. Low. Flour. Holding steady. Dried meat. Enough for another month. Seed stores. Strong. We were solid. And they'd keep it that way with or without me. Rachel found me checking the traps and handed me a note. She'd written it on the back of a scavenged candy wrapper. Just 3 words. East Ridge tomorrow. I looked up. She raised an eyebrow. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. I nodded. And just like that we went. No one asked where we were headed. We brought light packs, a knife each, a coil of rope, and dried apples. We climbed the ridge in silence. Spring was blooming hard now, wildflowers peeking through thawed earth, bees humming through the brush like they never knew a world on fire. At the top, Rachel sat on a flat stone and looked out over the valley. You could still see it from there. The bones of the old world. Collapsed buildings half swallowed by trees. Cars rusted out like hollow metal beetles. power lines hanging slack like spiderwebs. And in the middle of it all, our clearing, our tiny pulsing heart. She asked, "Do you regret it?" "Regret what?" "Letting them depend on you." I thought about that. About the day Monica tried to organize a vote. About the night Jared tried to steal a chicken. About the flare I fired into the sky. "No," I said. She nodded like she expected that answer. Then she said something I didn't expect. "You should leave." I stared at her. "I mean it." She said, "Go! Walk. See what's left out there. You did your part here. Maybe your part's done." My instinct was to resist. To say they still need me, but they didn't. Not anymore. I looked at her steady, weathered, no longer soft in the ways she used to be. "You'd be fine." She smiled. "We'll mess up, but we'll fix it." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket. "I made copies of your notes," she said. "Just in case." I laughed. Control freak. Learned from the best. We sat in silence for a while after that, watching the wind sweep through the pine trees below. I didn't say I'd go, but the idea stayed with me. That night, I cleaned my knife, packed a separate bag. Not large, just enough. I didn't tell anyone. But when Rachel passed me by the next morning, she nodded at the pack by the door. Didn't ask questions. Didn't need to. They'd be okay. Because the girl they once called weak, she'd built something that didn't need her anymore. And that was the most powerful ending I could have written. Day 218. I didn't leave that morning. Not because I changed my mind. Because I wanted to watch them one more time. Not supervise. Observe. There's a difference. I stood near the tree line with a satchel on my shoulder, the straps already molding to my collarbone. The clearing bustled like it always did, but this time I wasn't part of the engine. I was just watching it run. Chris was sharpening tools by the stump. Efficient, quiet. Monica and Rachel were deep in the compost, testing soil density and debating mulch. Someone, probably Rachel again, had started marking a planting calendar near the coop with charcoal and bark. And it was working. I waited until they were too busy to notice I wasn't holding a shovel or a checklist or barking orders. And I walked, just out of sight, just far enough to taste the separation. But not to commit. You can't lead forever. And if you do it right, you shouldn't have to. Still, the road is lonelier when you're not dragging anyone behind you. I followed the southern trail for a while, boots crunching through damp pine needles. I passed the place where Jared got lost last winter, the creek where Monica once fell in while carrying water, the blackberry thicket where I'd taught Rachel to set her first snare. Ghosts of our struggle whispered through the trees. At the bend in the trail, I stopped, dropped my pack, sat on a fallen log. Tried to imagine myself gone, but I couldn't, not because I was scared, because I wasn't finished. I knew then I wouldn't leave, not yet. Not until I chose to fully without waiting to be missed. So I returned that night. No announcement, no drama. Just walked back in, stowed the pack under my bunk, and washed my hands at the basin like I'd never left. They didn't ask. They knew. Rachel passed me a bowl of stew without a word. Her eyes said everything. You came back on your own terms. That's what matters. The next day, I started giving pieces of the system away. Not orders. Ownership. I handed Monica the key to the storage cabinet. Said nothing. She blinked, then nodded once. The way a soldier accepts a promotion. I asked Chris to draw up next week's chore chart. He looked surprised, but pleased. I taught Rachel how to set the trap alarms I'd invented last fall. She memorized the knots in 5 minutes. Then I stepped back again, and the machine kept running. Better even, because now the gears wanted to move. The thing about survival is it's not just about preparing for collapse. It's about preparing for return. For moments when the system you built no longer needs you at its center. For the day you hand off the knife, and no one cuts themselves. By day 225, I wasn't the only one walking the perimeter. I wasn't the only one inspecting the traps. I wasn't the only one checking the water filtration. They all were, not because they feared punishment, but because it was their life now, their rules, their rhythm. I became the story they told each other. The one who saw it coming, the one who didn't flinch, the one they called weak until they followed her into the fire. And now, I was the foundation, not the roof. There was strength in that, and freedom. That evening, I returned to the ridge, alone. The valley below was breathing again. birds blossoms new life. And in the middle of it, that little clearing pulsed like a heartbeat. Not mine anymore. Ours. When I came back down, Rachel met me at the edge of camp. "You looked different up there," she said. "How so?" "Like someone who finally stopped guarding the door and walked through it." I smiled. Not because she was right. Because she saw it. I wasn't the shield anymore. I was the spark. Day 230. The clearing felt lighter. Not just because spring had melted the last of the snow, because something inside them had finally thawed too. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. I saw it in the way Monica braided her hair again, not for utility, but because she wanted to. In how Chris carved birds into the coop posts, one for every hatchling that survived. In the way Rachel laughed with her whole chest now instead of just behind her teeth. These were not the people who had stumbled to my cabin begging for food. They were a new species entirely. Forged by hardship, tempered by structure, shaped by me, yes, but no longer defined by me. And that meant it was almost time. Time for me to go, or at least stop hovering. But not before one last lesson. It started with a storm. The kind that doesn't bother with warning. One moment blue skies. The next black clouds rolling over the ridge like something ancient waking up. Wind tore through the trees like it had a score to settle. And our roof patch too many times finally gave in. A massive branch came down, puncturing the northwest corner of the cabin. It missed Monica by 3 feet. She screamed. Chris yelled for rope. Rachel ran for the supply shed. And I stood perfectly still watching the chaos unfold. My instinct was to move, to fix, to lead. But I didn't. Instead, I timed them. 3 minutes to clear debris, 5 to tarp the roof, 2 to account for everyone, another 10 to redistribute sleeping spaces, all without me saying a word. When the wind calmed and the first stars blinked through the sky, I found myself standing in the center of a system that no longer revolved around me. And it was perfect. Later that night, Rachel found me sitting in the half-finished greenhouse. She sat beside me, knees muddy hair tangled. "You didn't move," she said. "I didn't need to." She nodded. "We passed. It was never a test. It was the point." She leaned her head back and looked up at the stars. "You could leave tomorrow and we'd be okay." "Yeah," I said. "You would." And that didn't sting. It soothed. Because the girl they once mocked, the one they said would fold in the first frost, she had become the reason they even had a tomorrow. Day 233. We held a small ceremony. Not for anything big. Just a new planting. A dozen hands in the dirt pressing corn into soft spring soil. Rachel had painted stones to mark each row. Chris played a broken harmonica between tasks. We didn't talk about survival. We talked about tomatoes, about building a smokehouse, about maybe teaching nearby camps how to grow beets without ruining the pH balance. That's when I knew the transformation was complete. They weren't looking inward anymore. They were looking outward, building, extending, creating something that could spread, something better than what came before. Day 235. I packed again. Same satchel, same method, same weight. Only this time I didn't hide it. I left it by the door. Rachel saw it. She didn't ask. Just handed me a fresh canteen and a small jar of dried apple slices. "South Trail's clearer now," she said. I figured. I marked the best campsites with red thread. Of course she did. Monica approached that evening, tucked something into the outer pouch of my bag. I waited until later to check. It was a small carved token, the silhouette of a pine tree. On the back, she'd scratched a single word. Stay, not a command. A memory. A whisper of where I'd been, of what I'd meant. That night, Chris sat across from me at the fire. "You built the safest place I've ever known," he said. "No," I corrected. "We did." He smiled. "Yeah, but you made us believe we could." And that was the moment I finally believed it too. That letting go wasn't losing. It was giving something back better than I found it. Day 240. I left at dawn. No dramatic goodbyes. No hugs. No tears. Just a slow inhale, a nod to the trees, and the sound of soft footsteps on dew-wet leaves. The clearing was asleep when I passed the garden rows, neat and green corners tied off with Rachel's signature red string. A silent tribute to order, to continuity, to me. I glanced back once. The smoke from the chimney was steady, curling upward like a promise. They were fine. I didn't need to double-check him. I took the south trail, the one Rachel had mentioned. Sure enough, bits of red thread fluttered from low branches every few hundred paces, marking the way like breadcrumbs. She knew I'd go. Maybe she'd known longer than I had. The air was cool. The kind of cool that makes you feel awake, not unwelcome. I carried only what I needed. Water, dried apples, my knife, a small first aid kit, Monica's carved token. I didn't bring the flare gun. Didn't need to. That was the difference between me and the person I used to be. Back then I packed for fear. Now, I packed for freedom. By midday I reached the ridge that overlooked the lower valley. I could see traces of other camps far off, just curls of smoke, or the faint outlines of tarps against tree trunks. Other survivors, other stories. Maybe they needed help. Maybe they didn't. But I had something they didn't yet. Proof. Proof that a system could work. That discipline could save lives. That the girl everyone called fragile could build something others chose to follow. And if I'd done it once, I could do it again. Or better. I could teach them to do it without me. That was the part no one expected. They called me weak, and I didn't correct them. I just waited. Waited for the moment they'd come knocking with nothing but desperation in their eyes, and I'd answer the door holding a boiling pot of rabbit stew and a list of rules. Not to punish them, to prepare them, and it had worked. Because that's what strength really is. It's not volume, it's repeatability. I made them need me. Then I made sure they didn't anymore. By evening I found a stream, clean enough to drink, the rocks smooth from years of quiet erosion. I set a fire, not large, just enough to dry socks and keep the night from swallowing me whole. And as the fire crackled, I thought about what I'd do next. Not where to go, but how to show up. Because I wasn't just Zoey Calder anymore. I was a system, a proof of concept, a living reminder that sometimes the softest voice in the room is the one laying the foundation. Night fell, the stars blinked on, and for the first time in nearly a year, I was completely alone. But not lonely, not even a little, because behind me was a clearing full of people who could now build without me. And ahead, a world full of others still trying to find their footing. I could help, or I could just watch. Either way, I'd earned the right to choose. Because when they called me weak, I didn't argue. I built something instead. Day 250. The road ahead was quieter than I expected. Not silent, just still. Each morning I'd wake with the sun stretched beneath a tarp, or the boughs of a pine, and listen. Not for threats necessarily, just for the rhythm of the world without walls. Birds. Wind. The occasional soft snap of a distant branch. I could hear things again, my own thoughts mostly. And they surprised me, because they weren't heavy anymore. I wasn't reliving the early days, wasn't replaying the laughter-turned screams or the knocks on my door or the rules I had to invent when no one else would. I was thinking about now, about next. I passed through burned-out towns with green creeping between the bricks, found an abandoned train car full of books left like some forgotten altar to the old world. I took one a field guide on edible plants. It had notes in the margins. Someone else had tried to learn too. I liked that. A few days later, I came across a small group camped beside a shallow river. 3 adults, 2 kids, all tense-eyed and sunburned, crouched around a tiny fire. Their tarp was crooked. Their food cans of peaches and expired sardines was stacked haphazardly. They looked at me like I was a threat. I didn't blame them. I kept my hands visible. Sat on a log near the tree line. Said just one thing. Your water's downstream from your latrine. That got their attention. One of them, a woman with a shaved head and wary shoulders, stood up. You a scout? No, I said. Just someone who's already made all your mistakes. She studied me for a long while, then asked, You want to show us? And that's how it started again. Small. I showed them how to build a filter from sand, charcoal, and pine. Taught one of the men how to set a snare. Helped the older kid mend a tarp using fish spine and waxed thread. They asked questions. Not all of them friendly, but they listened. And when I left 3 days later, I saw the difference. The tarp had tension. The fire was ringed with stones. The kids weren't coughing. They didn't ask for my name. But I left a note. You don't have to be loud to lead. Just consistent. Day 267. I passed another camp. This one was cleaner. Organized. It had a perimeter. Rotating shifts. Signs of a shared system. But it lacked something else: flexibility. I watched for a day from a distance, saw a teenager get punished for burning potatoes. Publicly, the leader yelled. The others avoided eye contact. The kid cried. It wasn't abuse, but it was familiar. That could have been me. If I hadn't had Rachel, if I hadn't learned when to let go, so I didn't go in. I left a second note tied to a post just outside their line of sight. If you're still yelling, they're not following. They're submitting. Be better. I walked on, because this wasn't my world to rule. It was mine to cede. That was the thing about being called weak. It makes you watch. It makes you wait. And then, when the storm hits, it makes you ready. I was never meant to be a savior. I was the reset. The reminder that strong doesn't have to mean brutal. That leadership can come from silence, from consistency, from being the one who doesn't crack, even when no one thanks you. Day 280. I found a cliff. It overlooked a wide stretch of pine forest and glinting river. From up there, you could almost pretend the world hadn't cracked, that the hum of life below hadn't been rewritten into something harsher. And I sat there for a while thinking, not about regret, not about revenge, about impact. They called me weak, and because they did, I built something better than any of them could imagine. Not perfect, but lasting. They came to me broken. I gave them structure. They wanted rescue. I gave them rules. And when they were ready, I gave them freedom. That's the real revenge, isn't it? To not just survive what they thought would break you, but to become the blueprint. To build a life that teaches others how to never need you again. I stood up, slung my satchel over one shoulder, and whispered 2 words into the wind, soft and final. Keep going. Then I walked on. If this story stayed with you, if you felt even a flicker of something real in it, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, but only if you want more stories like this. Quiet, powerful, and built from truth. We tell stories that don't scream, they echo. And yours might be next. Good night. Now, if you've stayed with me this long, thank you. You've walked every mile with me, felt the frost in your bones, tasted the silence in the trees, and heard the soft crunch of old leaves under steady boots. Maybe you expected a big battle, a fire, a final confrontation. But real survival isn't made of climaxes. It's made of choices, small ones, quiet ones. The choice to stay calm when others panic. The choice to prepare while they laugh. The choice to lead without needing applause. They called me weak, and I never corrected them. Because the best revenge isn't shouting, "I told you so." It's making them whisper it to each other when they realize you were right all along. You don't have to be the loudest voice to lead. You just have to be the one still standing after the noise dies down. That's what I became. Not the boss, not the hero, the constant. And now, wherever I go next, I carry that with me, not as a burden, but as a blueprint. For anyone out there who's been underestimated, talked over, pushed aside, remember this: you don't rise by yelling, you rise by building, and then walking away when it stands without you. Good night.